I say good evening to you. Glad to have Adam with us this evening, and Adam and I are going to be discussing biblical battle gear. And of course, on Wednesday night, the way we've been doing this is to try to give us instruction, just teaching, and about different subjects in the Bible. Adam, glad to have you with us, and
appreciate you inviting me to do this with you.
You may want to say something about our friend here.
Oh, well, yeah, we have a Roman soldier behind
Caesar
us. We may be pointing to a few things on here as we move forward and kind of go through this list that Brother Philip has provided of just a sampling of different battle gear that was found during biblical times. So,
all right.
Get us started here. We'll get.
First thing we've got to talk about is the battering round. And let's see. I will read have you already got it turned there?
I do.
If you want to read Ezekiel 4 and verse 2.
It says, lay siege against it, that being talking about the city of Jerusalem. Lay siege against it, build a siege wall around it, and heap up a mound against it. Set camps against it also, and place battering rounds against it all around. And
Adam, what did you say that was called in the old King James? We're reading out the New King James.
And if you go to, let's see here, in Ezekiel 26 verse 9, and it's odd that battering ram is found extensively through the book of Ezekiel. He probably mentions it more than any other author does, but in Ezekiel 26 verse 9, he writes, he will direct his battering rams against your walls, and his axes he will break down your towers. But if you go back and read the old King James, that is actually translated there, he will direct his engines of war, which I thought was kind of a unique take that a battering ram would be considered an engine of war, which is, to me, is just a very unique term that you don't hear very often.
Yeah. In that day and time, I'm sure, of course, I think most people know, I'll get you to describe here in a minute what a battering ram is and how it works. And of course, they were very effective in that day and time because they had tremendous walls. Some of the walls, I'm going to say this and you tell them about it, please, but some of the walls, well, like the wall around Babylon, that wall was big enough for them to have chariot races on top of the wall. And there were several cities that had walls big enough to have at least 2 and sometimes more than 3 chariots racing on top of the wall.
Some of these cities actually had more than one exterior wall. There was space in between.
You might want to explain that too.
Well, you would have your main outer wall, and then sometimes you would have an open space, and then a secondary wall behind it. So you would actually have to go through 2 walls to penetrate the city.
And a defense.
Yeah, it was actually, obviously it was a defense mechanism to these cities to protect themselves and against outside invaders. And the battering ram, you've seen it depicted a lot in movies where, they're at the front gate, and it's just as you see in the movies. It was a large, usually wooden, cylindrical piece of wood that would take many men, very, very heavy. Sometimes they might be on wheels, and they would use it to ram into the gate or the wall repeatedly to eventually break through and cause an opening to invade a city. And oftentimes they would have coverings above them so that the protectors of the city that was being attacked from on top of the walls, throwing down objects and things to those that were operating the battering ram, would be protected above from such things.
Pouring hot oil on.
Pouring out anything, shooting arrows out, some arrows, obviously another biblical battle gear we may look at in a minute, but shooting bow and arrows, throwing spears at them, pouring oil and trying to set them on fire. Anything to protect them from above.
How would you make a comparison to Satan and a battering ram? Now I'm caught off guard. Let me say something, and you might want to say something else about it. The battering ram, right? It was a constant boom, just as you were saying. It's heavy, but as soon as they could get it back and get it again and back, but it was a keep it on constant battering until they achieved their goal.
Correct.
Now, would you think it would be kind of true that Satan is a constant batterer of us?
I definitely think you could draw that comparison. I would say this as a discomparison that just popped in my mind is the fact that a battering ram was very deliberate. You saw it coming.
Right.
Satan, to me, is a little bit more cunning. He's not going to be as deliberate and as noticeable. Battering ram is in your face. And sometimes, sin can be that way, very deliberate, but in other ways, a lot of times to me, sin, is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And
But
so,
would you say that exactly that's right, but would you say this is true? He never really lets up.
he's relentless.
Yeah.
Yeah, relentless.
But that battering ram, Adam, it was very effective in that day and time.
I think it's also worth mentioning the verse there in Ezekiel 4:2 that we read. Of course, the prophet Ezekiel is writing this. If I'm not mistaken, this is in reference to 2 Kings chapter 25 when he foretells the Babylonian. Help me out. What's the word I'm looking for? Attack or siege of Jerusalem. And the reason for this is if you flip back to 2 Kings chapter 24, you see the acts of Jehoiakim and his father. And if you look I'm going to read 2 Kings 24 verse 3, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it says, "Surely at the commandment of the Lord this came upon Judah to remove them from his sight because of the sins of Manasseh according to all that he had done, and also because of the innocent blood that he had shed, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood which the Lord would not pardon." And because of that shedding of that innocent blood in the nation of Judah, brought about by the evil kings that had one after the other, is what God could not allow to continue, and that was when He allowed the Babylonians to come in, Nebuchadnezzar, to take them in the Babylonian captivity.
And
that was the reason for the battering rams to appear.
Right. And of course, another reason for battering rams being mentioned so much, engines of war, most all of your ancient cities were walled cities. I'm trying to think right here. I believe that the oldest walled city of the world was Hebron, I think. I might stand corrected on that.
You're going to be on your own on that.
But,
I couldn't begin to make a guess.
But they were, almost all your cities were walled cities because of protection.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's so wonderful that we live in a country, just say this is a side piece, where we have not had to live in fear all of our lives of being invaded by some enemy, army, or whatever. But that was not the case. Back then in those days, man, they came from Egypt and went up north toward Rome and toward Babylon, and it came down each other. They were constantly fighting against each other, and then as soon as the one that was defeated could build back up, they'd go back and get the other one.
Well, Israel was constantly surrounded by
Right.
nations that wanted to infiltrate and take over the land that they lived in. Obviously, the Moabites, the Philistines, the Babylonians. I mean, you constantly had people that were wanting to destroy them, so to speak.
And in some place, we may read it here tonight, it's going to talk about a causeway. Just building up earth all the way up. The way the Lord God, in His infinite wisdom, selected, well, I guess one of the reasons He selected Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built on mountains. And I'm not talking about little mountains, big mountains. And so they had that natural defense to start with. And then, as Adam has pointed out, they had several walls around the cities. If you got through the first one, that, I mean, you weren't there yet.
If I'm not mistaken, Solomon completed, I know, 2 walls around Jerusalem. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll go to the next one. The next one is talking about the javelin. Now, our guy here, he's left his javelin somewhere else, but if you want to read that, and I think while he's looking at it, a javelin, do we have another name for a javelin?
A spear.
Spear.
Yeah, I mean, they're
Similar.
Yeah, they're very similar. If you look at a lot of Bible scholars, the spear and the javelin are almost used interchangeably in translations. If you look at different translations. So,
would you say while you're looking for that the javelin might be a better weapon as far as throwing it?
It would be. And matter of fact, this I'd like to read, if you will. I brought a Bible dictionary here, and it talks a little bit about the difference between the two. If you'd like to hear that.
Yes, please.
So it talks about javelins / spear, and it says in various translations of the Bible, these 2 terms are used interchangeably to refer to the same basic weapon. A long, slender shaft with a metal point. The only difference between them is that the spear was heavier and larger than a javelin. Therefore, the spear was used more as a thrusting weapon, whereas the javelin was used as a throwing weapon. And then, they're mentioned more often in the Old Testament.
I guess the javelin, you would be wanting to use it, once you follow up on this and read that, what you got, but when you were starting to attack them from a distance, you would, like you say, you might be throwing that, but when you got up close, you want to have that heavier spear to try to pierce some of this armor somewhere. Let you go ahead.
Well, and I thought about that too. You start looking at weapons for up close versus distant, longer range, what I would call a longer range weapon that we will look at, as we have time. But a spear would definitely be an up close and personal weapon. Whereas a javelin, once you throw the javelin, you're done. You get one shot.
You better have something else.
You better make it count.
Better have your sword or something else.
But Joshua chapter 8 verses 18 is what I'm going to read from. I believe I got it. Joshua 18. Let me get to Joshua 8. Bear with me here. So in Joshua 8:18 it says, and then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it unto your hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. Any thoughts on that? You think Joe?
I would just kind of wonder if that's there using that term for actually a javelin, as opposed just to the spear. Could have been either one. I mean, I just kind of wonder if it might be because it was lighter, but it could have been a spear. But it was definitely
to me.
We're fixing to go get them.
It's a very symbolic display of power to me.
Right.
The leader of your nation extending out a spear towards a city would be, to me, very symbolic and very empowering as a nation that we are about to attack and overcome this city.
And when those folks over there saw that, they knew what was coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you look at King Saul, you think about his spear and the size of it, and a couple instances of where he attempted to kill David once, where he threw a spear at David, but David.
And even one of them, I think, even kind of pinned his clothes or something.
That's right. Yeah, I believe that may be correct. And in 1 Samuel 18, I made a note of that, is when Saul tried to kill David by throwing a spear at him at close range, but he was able to evade it. And of course, flee from King Saul. But that's you look at another king, another leader with a spear, excuse me, and. Which would be, again, Saul being such a large man.
And a great warrior. And
with a spear in his hand would be a very intimidating sight.
Oh, yeah.
I would imagine to come upon.
I would rather meet the guy with the javelin.
I think so, yeah.
Than the spear because of that very fact. Okay, well, our next one, we're going to talk about the bow and arrow. I guess this would be the Air Force of the antique world, ancient world.
This is your long range weapon here. I'm a long range shooter, so I appreciate accuracy at distance very much. And the bow and arrow, a skilled man with bow and arrow is something to behold. And so,
let me interject something right here, since Adam said that. A lot of you may not know that Adam is a long-range shooter, I guess, getting in the neighborhood of a sharpshooter.
I enjoy it. It's a skill set that's still a work in progress.
You might tell us before you go on, how far away do you actually shoot at the target? How far are you from it?
Furthest I've shot at one in competition would be 1,200 yards.
1,200 yards?
Yes, sir.
Now, let's see. If I recollect, that's almost a mile.
A mile is 1,760 yards.
Oh, is it 1,700? Okay, and you said it was
1,200. So
okay.
I mean, it's well over.
Okay, 1,760. Well, you're getting
close to
over
3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, 3/4 of a mile. That's a long ways.
It's a long shot, and it's one. You can, with the right weapon system, you can do it. You can make effective shots at that distance. So.
And even what we're talking about here, the bow and arrow, in that day and time, there were fellows that were very accurate at very long distances with that.
Let's see, the passage that we have here to read from is 2 Samuel. You don't have that. Let me
22 verse 35.
Let's see, let me get back here to 2 Samuel.
Something else I want to notice when you get through reading that. 2 Samuel 22 and verse 35. Now, you don't do like me I spent quite a few minutes today. This is not the right verse, but I was in 1 Samuel.
Oh, okay.
And I said it wasn't the right verse.
Now, this is a little bit of an obscure verse in a manner of speaking. So David, I got to give a little background to make this verse make sense. So David is giving praise to God for basically the skills that God has given him in manners of war, the warrior that he is. And so
he was a great warrior.
He was. And I would like to, I'm going to back up and start in verse 33 to give a little more effect than just reading the one verse. But he says, God is my strength and power, and he makes my way perfect. He makes my feet like the feet of deer, and he sets me on my high places. He teaches my hands to make war, and so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. So he's talking, obviously it would be very difficult to bend a bow of bronze, but that's a metaphor for the type of warrior. To me, that's the metaphor for the type of warrior that God had created in David.
You might want to explain, I understand what you're talking about. You might want to explain that. Some folks might not understand about bending the bronze as opposed to wood or fiberglass or something like that.
Wood, fiberglass, they're all pliable materials, whereas bronze would be very stiff and almost impossible to bend, with just the human hands and with a string like that.
That is very impressive in that verse, isn't it?
It is it's very poetic way of describing the attributes that God had provided for David in times of conflict.
But would you say this, Adam? A bronze bow would have some powerful shot behind it, right?
It would. It
could even pierce possibly some armor, possibly, or at least. I don't know if it could pierce that, but it might. It could get in places where they're not completely covered. That's why they really want to get covered, because of the spear, and because of these arrows, the javelin, and other things. But
there's when I was reading this and looking at these, there were two stories in the Old Testament that popped in my head as far as a bow and arrow, and I haven't had a chance to share these with Brother Philip. We haven't had a chance to study this together. Just to preface that, this is kind of off the cuff, so we and I are going off each other. But would you like to look at a couple of those, the bow and arrow, and see the stories that jumped out of my head? First one being of the death of King Ahab. Of course, it was married to Jezebel. If you flip with me to 1 Kings 22.
Just shot that up in the air. He just took up.
Well, yeah. So he tricked the king of Judah into going into war with him.
Right.
And he dressed the king of Judah up like the king of Israel, which he was, and he sent him out. And all the warriors thought that was Jehoshaphat, I think, was the other king.
I can't remember right now.
Let's read it.
Yeah. That is an interesting story.
Yeah, and so he tried to fool them with clothing, and then once they realized that was the king of Judah and not the king of Israel, they saw Ahab fleeing in a chariot, and one of the soldiers drew a bow and at a great distance fired that arrow, like you said, up in the air, and it struck Ahab between his armor, and he actually bled out in the chariot.
Like maybe all around the arm.
You would have to be. You would have to find a
or maybe even like between
somewhere of
a
a connecting piece, any sort of gap.
So we know who guided that arrow.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
God did.
With 100%. But let's. I like to actually read the way the Bible words it. If you'll allow me here. What are we looking at? 1 Kings chapter 22. Verse 34 is where I just did what you did. I'm in 2 Kings. I'm like, this doesn't look right.
While you're looking at this, this is also just another demonstration of the power of God in a way you might not even think about it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. There was no doubt that it was God's providence that guided that arrow that day. It was Jehoshaphat, who was the king of Judah at the time. So it says here, so when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, surely it is the king of Israel, so they turned to fight against him. But then Jehoshaphat cried out, and as it happened, when the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, that they turned back from pursuing Jehoshaphat. And then verse 34 says, now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel, referring to Ahab, between the joints of his armor, so that he said to the driver of the chariot, "Turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded." And of course, if you go on down, it says that the blood ran out of the wound onto the floor of the chariot, and Ahab eventually died from that mortal wound.
And this was the husband of Jezebel.
It was. It was.
Well, what's the other one you wanted to mention there?
It was the warning signal that was used by Jonathan.
Right.
To warn David. Matter of fact, it was after Saul had thrown the spear at him and David had fled. It was kind of hiding out had fled from Noath, or if I'm pronouncing that right, the city. And Jonathan went out to meet him and said that he would kind of gauge his father, and he would shoot the arrows one way if it was okay, and he'd tell a servant to go get them, and if not, he would shoot them another way. And so he used basically the bow and arrow in this instance as sort of a communication method.
And I thought it's interesting too that he told the young boy to go get it. Mm-hmm. So he's going to find it, I guess, but you go get the arrow. Mm-hmm. Well, in that reading there, Adam, is there anything in 2 Samuel 22:35 said about the armor of Goliath or the spear of Goliath? Or what is it say anything about talking about the weight of it in that one, or it might be the next one?
No, it's let's see. No, 2 Samuel 22:35. That was one we read a moment ago.
Okay. All right. Now,
bending the bow of bronze.
The coat of mail here.
Yeah.
And you might explain to them. You got a good visual illustration here in 1 Samuel 17 verse 5. The coat of mail.
Mm-hmm. So it is basically any sort of armor, body armor would be, and going back.
This right here
this would be considered body armor, and so a coat of mail would be specifically body armor consisted of chains basically that have been woven together. You saw it a lot during the time of the Crusades, a lot of chain mail and that sort of thing. So you've had, as far as body armor goes, warriors have worn thick leather. And it has kind of progressed throughout the years. So even now we wear, bulletproof vests, which is a type of body armor.
What do you call that stuff?
Kevlar is
Kevlar.
One, and even now there's newer things than that that are so impressive that they can stop.
But that could, in many cases, stop arrows.
Stop arrows, a sword. Anything.
Maybe a spear, a spear might knock you down, it might still kill you.
And even if it did, it could still possibly penetrate, but the damage done is going to be, you might still be able to survive versus if you didn't have it. Yeah.
Okay.
So any sort of body armor, and it actually talks about in this, the body armor. It says as far back as 3000 BC, primitive body armor was worn by soldiers in many nations of the ancient world. The term armor described anything from thick leather clothing to metal mail. General terms in the Bible include coat of mail, like we just looked at. Habergion, I believe is how that's pronounced, and then brigadine is another.
Does it give a definition right after the word armor? It's just a coat or covering? Or
it's just any sort of, that definition specifically was for body armor, which is that kind of encompasses your chain mail, your thick leather. This would, I would not necessarily call that right there chain mail as much as I would just metal body armor, overlapping body armor.
But that was very, very helpful to any soldier in battle, wasn't it?
It was. And there were different, of course, we probably won't have time to get to it. We'll point out a couple of real quick ones. Of course, you had your helmet, which, with your armor for your head. And then you had the ones for your lower legs, which are called your greaves. That was one that was listed on here, which, we probably won't be able to go in depth in it, but it was just simply a covering mainly for the lower part of the leg. And you saw them a lot around the soldiers, where they would, they really didn't have a lot on your thighs because my assumption would be it would restrict your movement somewhat.
Right.
But on the lower leg, you would have what's called a greaves on each leg.
Right. Okay, in that verse though, in 1 Samuel 17 verse 5, what does that actually say there? I think there's something I want you to look at
Okay, this is,
And this is talking about Goliath, isn't it?
okay, this is on the coat of mail, yeah. It says, this is talking about Goliath, it is. It says he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze.
I looked that up. You know how much 5,000 shekels of bronze is? Did you get to see that?
No, I did not get a chance
It's
to.
156 pounds. 156 pounds. And by the way, Goliath was a little over 9 feet tall. Walking around with 150 pounds of armor on. And then we'll mention later on his spear and stuff like that. And he was a champion. No telling how many people he'd killed before he met David.
Oh, no telling. No telling.
All right. Well, what about...
Hello, Amory. Abel, interrupting this Bible talk to let you know that due to technical difficulties, can you say technical difficulties? Yeah, good try. Due to technical difficulties, we weren't able to finish what you were watching with Adam and Philip there. So that, bye, Laurel. That, pretty much makes this a two-parter. So tune in next week for part 2 of Battle Gear in the Bible. Thanks, guys.